Welcome, admins from far and wide. We're so pleased that you've come to join us this afternoon.
Just put your root passwords at the top of these.
Yeah. This session is called Auditing Your Operations. It's designed to help you evaluate your own organization objectively. The criteria we'll be using is based on a website called the Operations Report Card. You can Google that if you want to check it out. The guy that wrote that, his name is Tom Limoncelli. Now that he had a partner, Peter Grace. It covered 7 operational areas. It has 32 items in total, so we're going to move fairly quickly. The site has strong ties back to Tom's book, a book that Brian and I learned about last year called Time Management for System Administrators. So keep in mind that these sources are sysadmin focused. They're not necessarily user focused, so take that with a grain of salt. It's based on the concept that you're going to improve your own department, and by doing that, free up your time and mental focus to help your users. So it's the concept of like when you're on the airplane, you're supposed to put on your own oxygen mask before you help the person next to you. So take into account that, like I said, both Tom and Peter have a lengthy background as sysadmins, and these things are all written from that point of view. So that being said, we're now going to introduce your speakers today. That bottom one, that's for base imaging.
Yeah, it's going to be one of those.
And Slack channel went crazy. I'm Dennis Wurster. I am the Associate Director of Computing Services at the Eastman School of Music in Rochester, New York. I can be found on Twitter at WildEep. Eastman School of Music is a world-class leader in music education, spanning 9 decades of producing award-winning graduates, boasting Guggenheim Fellows, Grammy, and ASCAP award winners on its distinguished faculty.
My name is Brian Meehan. I'm a professional chocolate chip cookie enthusiast. I also received my paycheck from the Allendale Columbia School as their Director of Information Technology. Our advertisement, Allendale Columbia is celebrating its 125th anniversary this year as an independent school in Rochester, New York for students in grades nursery through 12. You can find me at Binary Days.
So you might remember us from our previous talk, Mac Administration, the Fundamentals, in 2014, and also Troubleshooting the 9 Indispensable Rules to Find Bugs Fast, which was yesterday.
So we're going to be taking today a top-down look at your organization and your operations. No real magic is going to be displayed here. A lot of this stuff is things that you can ask yourself and audit yourself. But what we're going to be trying to step away from is doing this in your head, and rather doing this on paper and really putting pencil to paper, or pens. I hear they have a lot of them out in the lobby. So that way when you get back, you can discuss that with your team. Beware that these items here are not going to be the panacea that can solve deeper problems within any organization: communications, maturity, skill level, ability to execute. Those are going to derail any best practice.
Right. So your goal here today is to figure out what your gaps are and to try and fill those gaps. And this session is going to be full of suggestions. Many effective departments use most of these. And the advice that we're dispensing here is up to you to implement. And it's okay to acknowledge that some of them just may not apply to your organization as well. So these are fundamental practices, and they're based on the idea of good IT hygiene. They can apply to any sort of systems management, but ignoring them can create a cascading effect. So if you have a water leak, for example, that's making a puddle somewhere, you need to fix the leak before you go get your mop.
So we're going to assume that you're not the 2 guys up at the top. You're probably one of those other 2 there. So we're going to assume that as a sysadmin, either shiny and bright-eyed or crusty and curmudgeonly, that you're comfortable with terms like automation, production versus pre-production, testing, backups, patching, networking, general nodding of heads. Cool. An interesting exercise might be, however, to let your boss take a run through this audit on their own and then compare notes. At the very least, you might find a greater appreciation for the work that you do.
So today we're going to help you conduct a self-assessment. We're going to use the papers that we've handed out. We're going to have you answer yes or no to a series of questions. You don't have to share your results with anybody. It might be helpful in considering which sessions to attend here or in future years. There's lots of experts here. This is a fantastic place to be. We did a quick straw poll before we began. It's had a lot of new users. Also, we're going to take questions via the Google Slides Q&A feature. We'll put that address at the top of the screen, which is now. That's fantastic. You can connect to that URL and type in your question. Because we're moving fairly quickly, we'll make sure to get all of those questions put together. And you can also read what other people's questions are and upvote them if there's one that you think is important too. We're going to address those at 3 different points throughout this, so we'll make sure to get to your questions.
The goal of your department is to deliver service that is effective, timely, and kind. I used to train new call center reps that when someone calls up, they want a quick answer, they want it to be pleasant, and they want it with the least amount of effort on their part. One of the best ways to do this is to make sure that your environment does not become interrupt-driven. That means that problems are pushed to us instead of pulled by us. Think of all the time that we lose when we get off track for that drive-by task or that quick question. This takes away from the things that you've already committed to, and to your end users or to your supervisors, that can make you appear to be unreliable because you've committed to something and you weren't able to execute on it because of all the things that are coming into you. So if we're not careful, we end up addressing the latest and the loudest, whether or not it's justifiable. So the very first item, it's so obvious it's painful, having a ticketing system. Spiceworks. I love this shirt because then I just walk around the office and go, huh? It's better for everyone. Humans, we don't remember as well as computers, so I guarantee you if a user comes up to me in the hallway and asks me, hey, can you go and take a look at something? I promise I will forget that in 10 seconds. Expecting sysadmins to remember all the requests is a direct route to failure. Keeping the system requests in a database improves sharing within your teams. It enables better time management because sysadmins aren't going to end up duplicating the work of each other. They're going to split tasks up intelligently. It prevents interruptions from people who want to make requests or for, hey, I just need to check on that request that I put in yesterday. If they have some of that transparency, they can look at that on their own. Management wins from this too because they can see when requests have been stalled and figure out what they need to help get the resources assigned to get that finished. And it allows management to look who those frequent flyers are to your help desk and maybe get them the training that they need.
So there's this concept of the 3 empowering policies.
Wait, 3 empowering policies? What are those?
I'm so glad you asked. So you have to define these, and you have to, more importantly, publish them once you've defined them. So let's take a quick sidebar. What are the 3 empowering policies? Well, like I said, there are 3 of them. First, you have to define the ways you're going to allow people to ask for help. Sysadmins need to be empowered to redirect users to follow this policy. And if you don't do this, one of 3 things is going to happen. Again, you're either going to respond to the people who were the loudest to you or the people who made requests most recently. You're going to pick and choose what work to work on, which makes your team look inconsistent. And your team is going to get overwhelmed with the number of requests that you get. So you might say, what's the appropriate way for this to happen? You can define, we're only going to take requests via phone and voicemail, or text message, or Facebook chat, or walk-in. And you had a story where somebody actually showed up at your house one time?
I was in the neighborhood, and I figured you might have an extra network switch because I need one at home. Yeah. Not even a faculty or student. It was a parent of a student at the school. Yeah. But I had one, and I let him borrow it.
So this helps you make sure that your items are going into your ticketing system just the way you expect them to. When you don't follow this, you will become interrupt-driven. And remember, being interrupt-driven is the way to lose focus. And like we heard in an earlier presentation, you really want to maintain your focus for dealing with the bigger issues around your department and not being hounded with small requests of, I can't print, why can't I get on the network? How do I make sure that this new hire has the things that they need? Those should all be requests that are handled in a very specific, methodical way. So one thing you might consider doing is making your policy match whatever inputs your ticketing system supports. That's a good place to start if you are looking for something to do. So the second of the 3 empowering policies is to figure out what constitutes an emergency. And it's important that your department have a strict definition of what an emergency is and also what it isn't, because that's going to allow you to set priorities. Your department doesn't have to guess anymore about what that is, so the users don't see any inconsistency of, wait a minute, you helped that guy out with that thing, and that wasn't nearly as important as what I needed, but then you didn't have any time for me. So what we can recommend is that you define what your code red is, and everybody's different industry will have a different code red. Code red typically means something's not working, and that's interrupting the money getting to us if you're in private industry, or that's interrupting education from happening if you're in the education industry. There may be an additional consideration depending on your industry. Then define what a code yellow is. Code yellow basically means if this doesn't get resolved in a certain period of time, it's going to turn into a code red. It's going to turn into a bigger problem. So that way you can set priorities for these 2 important functions, and everything else you can consider to be a fairly routine request. This is the age-old adage, the lack of planning on your part does not necessarily constitute an emergency on our part. And the third empowering policy is to figure out what's supported. And by supported, I mean, what thing are you responsible for as a sysadmin? That could be various processes on a server, making services available to the people on your network, supporting certain kinds of hardware, things that are issued by your organization, or some things that might be BYOD, bring your own device. So you have to figure out how you want to handle these things. You have to figure out when you're going to support the users. Are they allowed to come to your house? Maybe they are. I hope not. You have to figure out, who do you support? Do you support only the people that work in your organization? Do you support their spouses? Do you only support the spouses of the C-level suite? And it's important to also determine if you're going to make home visits to other people. And if you've got somebody who comes to you with an iBook G4 running macOS 10.3, are you going to support that? So also, do you have a life cycle for older hardware? And if somebody brings in something new, let's say an entirely new device gets released, and somebody magically finds funding for it and gets it purchased and then brings you a case of them and says, here, we're using these now. Are they allowed to do that? Or do they have to go through a process where that has to be vetted and approved? Just figure out, for new technology, are you going to give automatic support, or do they have to go through an approval process?
This slide here can be a little hard to read because it's got a word that we have trouble pronouncing on it. It's no. So all together, let's try that together.
No.
Oh,
very good,
great.
very good. So those are the 3 empowering policies. Know them, live them, love them.
Post them on your door. Get
Yes.
management buy-in for those policies so that when you get pushback, you have ground to stand on.
That's right. You could be your own Martin Luther there. Okay. Number 3.
I'm a numbers guy. I like to be data-driven. I like to live in a world of observations and conclusions. So you need to be data-driven when you make decisions or want to sway upper levels of management. And the best way to develop your metrics is to create 1 metric per sentence or clause of your charter. And if you don't have a charter, now would be a good time to think about making one. For example, the charter for PC deployment might be to provide a high-end, standardized computer to each employee starting on their first day, refreshed on a 3-year cycle at industry-leading operational costs. Got all the buzzwords in there. Mm-hmm. So those metrics that you're recording out of that might be the number of weeks since the standard configuration was updated, the cost of the current standard configuration, the number of new employees per month, capital expenditures, operational expenditures, maybe a bucket that says how quickly you deployed it, on day of arrival, first day, second day, greater than 3 days, the age of your fleet, less than a year old, 1 to 2 years old, 3 to 5 years old, older than 3 years. That way, when you are talking to your management, you can say, here is our trend, rather than, I have this problem and here is what the data says right now, because 1 point does not a trend make. If you don't have a charter, there's some starter metrics you can use. How many sysadmins do you have? How many users do you provide service to? How many machines do you manage? You can do all kinds of things like measuring your bandwidth and look at that over time. Pick 4 to 5 important SLAs and record how close you were to meeting them. Any of these things are going to give you historical advantage when you're speaking to your management. And it gives you the ammunition you need to do your job. So let's talk about playing nice with each other. Modern team practices.
So at this point, we're talking about modern team practice number 1. Do you have a policy and procedure wiki? Now they use the term wiki here on the website. Basically, it's a publicly available, easily editable documentation space. That can be whatever you want it to be. It doesn't have to be a wiki. So we want to document 2 things. We want to document policies. Policies are the descriptions of what should be done, and also procedures, which are how do you implement those? How do you make that happen? So I prefer to take an event-driven approach. What happens when a new employee starts? What kinds of things have to happen? Well, we have to take a machine out of inventory. We have to image it. We have to verify with their manager what SharePoints they're supposed to see on the server. We have to make sure that they've got an email address, make sure that they're set up for VPN, and push those out. Now that may vary from department to department. You also need to know what happens when a new machine comes in, and also the sunset equivalents of those. What happens when somebody leaves the company, or what happens when somebody is terminated, or what happens when the machine is decommissioned. You also want to know, how do I add or delete a person to the VPN? How do I change a disk in our RAID system? How to change the root password on all the servers, should that be necessary. And those tend to fall into 3 categories. First, it's the things that you want to do consistently, because your brain, if you don't have this documented, doesn't do a good job of keeping track of those details over time. Second, the things that you do infrequently and don't want to have to spend time re-remembering what the procedure is. There are several things that I do about once every 8 months. And every single time, I have to go back to my documentation and say, oh yeah, how do we do this? And then read through it and say, oh, that's right. In fact, I'll write them in a cute, funny way to myself. Hello, future Dennis. Clearly, it's time to do this again, so here's what you need to have ready first. And number 3 are the things that you do when you're panicking and you don't want to have to think on your feet. So let's say you've got a server down, but your phone's ringing off the hook for some other reason. You need to go and replace that drive or bring the service back up. You want to have specific policies of how do you get things back to the normal state.
One item on that, policies and procedures. Another good way to distinguish that, policies have management buy-in. Policies are written with the organization. Procedures are written by you guys.
That's right. So, modern team practice number 2, do you have a password safe?
Not a spreadsheet.
That's right. Not a text file, not something somebody texted to you. We have to keep a modern team environment has to work on a number of systems simultaneously. And there are solutions that can help you with this. AgileBits has 1Password for Teams. That might be something to investigate. You can look at something, there's another product called Monkeybox that's available. That allows you to share things securely among multiple people.
Just keep them in a Facebook closed group. Is that good?
No, I wouldn't recommend that. These systems often contain change history, so you can verify and document any updates that have happened to those important system passwords.
Intentionally or unintentionally. Revision history is the key to this one here. You might say, oh, wait, we're sysadmins, we're not programmers. But scripts are programs too. We write lots of things. A common example would be monkey recipes, first boot scripts,plists, Apple ARD configuration. These are all things that can go into source control. It helps you keep an audit trail because you can see when things were checked in, last time you worked on it. Oh, wait, that's not working out the way we intended. We can roll back to a previous version. But it also allows you to share with other contributors too, because there's something that you might have made that says, hey, we could use that too. That's really good. So take a look. If you don't already have a GitHub, go ahead and create yourself a GitHub account and see all the resources that are out there. You'll be glad you did.
That's right. All right, number 4.
We're moving along.
Do you use a bug tracking system for your code? If you're not in a development-focused industry, this one may not apply to you. This is not one that applies to either one of our organizations.
But
if we got the word that we absolutely had to get this in production tomorrow, we could maybe pretend to consider putting them into our ticketing system.
Yeah.
That would be a way to at least keep track of them and at least keep an honest record of when those types of requests came in and how they were being handled.
Simply making a category within your ticketing system for things like that can help you define that if coding is not one of your primary functions.
Okay. Does stability have a higher priority than new features? Again, this is part of the website where he was talking more about environments that do production coding. Again, this doesn't apply to either one of our organizations, but it might apply to you. So the things that we tend to write aren't terribly long, aren't terribly complex. Whatever bugs we find, it's more often than not just a typo more than anything else. So that's not something we worry too much about.
We just aim for stability eventually. Design documentation goes by a lot of different names. For me, I refer to this as my site book. And my site book is what I would use if I were hit by the pie truck and tomorrow a reasonably competent sysadmin would have to come in and fill my shoes, or new shoes. Some consultants might call this a statement of work. Yeah, they're gross shoes. A work plan. They describe the current state and the desired state or how a system should work. They go by lots of different names. But the gist is that you need to document the things, all the things. Documenting maybe your auto package, a monkey workflow, showing that, I mean, we've seen lots of workflow diagrams here this week. The policy for adding a new employee, like Dennis mentioned earlier. I have a template I call the recipe card. Whenever we add a new line of business application, I fill out this recipe card, and it's got things like vendor info, licensing, installation notes, support agreements, and download instructions, even if it's just auto package, and I type auto package add. Your post-mortem process is not necessarily a description of you after your first cup of coffee.
Or before.
Or before. It's when something goes badly. This is the documentation step, or the meeting, or the process where everybody gets together and decides, okay, what happened, and how can we change our processes and procedures. But it doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. You can have a really great event and have a post-mortem after that to say, okay, how'd the event go? This gives you the ability to be on the path for constant improvement. You're always looking to be bigger, better, faster, and more, right? So we're going to pause here for a moment.
Yep, we're going to do our first Q&A roundup. We're going to take a look. We've had 2 questions submitted by the Google approach here. We're going to bring those up and attempt to answer them here. First one, what if your manager or director doesn't want policies, especially written ones that someone might not like?
I suppose you could have policies internally.
So without policies, you kind of just are required to talk to whoever comes to you soonest, handle their stuff until somebody more important than them gets in the way, and then assume that you don't get distracted with 3 other things while getting those things done, and then picking up the phone to answer the call about, hey, why didn't we get to number 2 yet? If your manager or director doesn't want policies, I guess we'd have to know more specifically what policies you had in mind.
Very quick thought. If somebody doesn't want them, I'll be all the more reason to have them.
Well, it's a discussion that needs to be had because you have to find that balance point. Otherwise, you're risking burning out your sysadmin staff. Is the bottom line. If you're working in a place that has a lot of churn through sysadmin staff, that can be indicative that you may have a manager that doesn't quite get this yet. So have them run through these audit questions. Okay.
Next one. The synopsis here is that in some places, IT is not the primary focus. It is a tool that helps the rest of the business get done. So how do we empower IT professionals when the workplace culture doesn't empower them?
I'll let you guess what industry this is. Every industry?
Some place within your organization is that gatekeeper. They're the person that got you into the organization to begin with. They're going to be your champion, and you need to find who that person is within the organization that is the champion of you. And they may be a lone wolf that's hey, they're rah IT pros, but once you find that person, you're going to work with their sphere of influence to help build that.
Right.
And
Unless you own the company, somebody had to like you well enough to hire you, right? So start there. That would be my tip, and see what you need to do next.
the next one is on blameless post-mortems. Not focusing on who's to blame, but meeting to figure out what happened, what we did well, what we do wrong, what should we do.
I've done this.
Yeah, I'm sure that they're going to do that after this, and I'm a super fan. I think that this is going really well, but I'll bet everybody wearing a red lanyard is going to be meeting after a well-deserved break this weekend,
right?
Sometime next week, to say, all right, how do we plan 2017 to be even more awesome than 2016?
Right.
And let's start getting those ideas flowing on paper right now while everything is still fresh in our mind. Is that what you had in mind? Cool.
Okay.
All right. So that's how the questions work.
Yep. Again, you can go to the URL at the top of the screen and put your question in. If you see other people's questions that you think are important, you can vote those up. We'll make sure to keep that in mind.
If anybody having questions with the papers, you can feel free to kind of audit yourself as we go along, or write notes in the boxes to take back. Let's dive into your systems now. These are the operational practices. So what is a service? Yes, there's the traditional services, NetBoot, DNS, but your other services might be the help desk. Anything that you provide to a user or a system provides to a user is a service.
Right. Or procurement,
Yep.
needs assessment.
So if you needed to rebuild that process or that service or start from scratch, could you do it? Could you do it 6 months from now? Because I don't want to keep teaching myself how to configure bind every 6 months. If I don't document it, then I end up reinventing whatever it was I needed to have to do, and I repeat all my old mistakes, and I learn from them again, especially if I was under pressure to do it the first time. My memory works far worse in an emergency. I'm inventing words up here, it's okay. Otherwise, can others do it? You got to document it so that others can do it, because we cannot subsist as the only person in our organization. That's not job security. That's ensuring that you never get a promotion. That's ensuring that you never go on vacation. That's ensuring that you can't come to Mac admins because you're the only person that knows how to add a new user to Active Directory.
Right.
And this goes beyond that. What if you are bringing in that new junior admin? Give them the documentation and let them read that for a few days so they can feel more acclimated to your organization. What a great way to bring somebody on board and let them feel part of the team by saying, all right, take a look at this. We're going to take a look, and I'm going to let you build this on a test VM. How can your manager ever promote you onto a new or even give you more interesting projects that's going to take you away from your daily tasks if you're the only person with that knowledge?
Okay. So the monitoring that they're discussing here should be based on the service level agreement that you come up with in that ops doc that Brian was talking about. And if you don't have a service level agreement, and by that I mean how quickly should you respond if something happens, something that you're responsible for? Are you guaranteeing a response within 4 hours? Are you guaranteeing a response within
3 to 4 weeks.
16 hours? The thing that I heard most recently this week was to specify that in work hours, not in clock hours, so that people understand the difference. If that's something that you can do and get buy-in, then that's something that can be helpful. If you don't have an SLA, then you're really limited to just doing, is the service up or is the service down as you're alerting? That's a good place to start. We're going to talk more about thresholds for when things in monitoring happen, so what to do and how to escalate those. That's going to come in a slide in the future.
We'll put that for future Dennis.
Okay, on-call rotations. So having a schedule for this serves a bunch of different people. It serves you, it serves whoever your customers are, it serves your management.
Out of curiosity, how many of you have a system where you are responsible for answering calls outside of work hours for system requests or system emergencies? Yeah.
Okay, that's a lot.
That sucks, huh?
That's a lot. I'd say that was easily half. Okay, so coming up with a schedule to handle this, assuming that you have more than just one person in your department, Being able to trade off is really important. It serves you because it lets you plan for things like going out to dinner with your wife or your spouse. It improves your service to your customers. It gives them a single consistent number to call when weird things happen. And it serves management because it lets them know that somebody will be available. And finally, it serves HR. They're aware of how and when and how often their labor hours are being allocated, so they know what's going on there. And if you don't think that you have a schedule, you do. It's just 24 by 7 by 365. So that everybody has one, they just don't know it.
That doesn't mean you can answer yes to that if that's your schedule.
Right. So this might sound pretty obvious, and a lot of the things that we're talking about today are obvious. A lot of the things in our last talk yesterday were also obvious. That was kind of our goal this year, was to say the things that are obvious, because sometimes they're just never said. We want our systems to be reliable, and we can preserve that reliability by segmenting the different environments. So introducing untested elements into production puts that reliability at risk. And if you decide to take that risk, it might work okay today, but you are gambling with the future. So that SLA that you came up with in the ops doc, you have to commit to a particular uptime or availability. You have to assure that your essential services are running, not compromised. Developers, if you have them in your environment, don't get to work on production equipment because the things that they're doing are important, but not at the expense of reliability. These separations should be clearly defined in that operations document because testing and troubleshooting and QA should all happen in a separate sandbox away from your production equipment.
Yeah, we shouldn't be doing our testing on production equipment either. How many of you are familiar with the terms canary process? So, okay. All right, so we'll explain that for a second. Coal miners used to carry canaries with them, and when the environment got too toxic, a canary with a lesser constitution than a human would keel over.
Right. It's an engineered weak point.
Right. You want that early warning sign to happen before you roll something out to everybody. So you start with one machine, maybe your own, and it works, great. Then you do some machines, maybe your coworkers, depending on whether you like them or not. Then you do many machines with larger and larger groups until you've got everything done. Any single failure along that way means you roll it all back and start over from the beginning. And don't continue until the problem's fixed. One, then some, then many. For example, Monkey has lots of catalogs that you can purpose in order to push updates out to just a few machines before you expand it by clicking the checkbox on that new package that says production. I have a library right outside my office, and the very first machine there is my test case machine. And then if it works well, I have another manifest that's just for the first bench of those 5 machines. And if it works well, then I roll out to the rest of that library. And that library has pretty much all the software that's available in all the rest of the labs in the school. So everything gets integrated there, and I have a quick way that I can walk outside my office, see, oh, it's on fire. Okay, all right, lock my door and hope it goes out.
Just don't put it with the other fire that you already have.
So many fires. As sysadmins, we automate for many reasons. It saves us time and money, allows us to have longer lunch breaks. It produces consistent results. A computer can do the same thing over and over many times. That's what they're really good at. And it takes a burdened task into an unburdened task. What that means is burdened tasks are ones that require your time and attention when they complete, watching that little progress bar go across the screen. Unburdened tasks are ones that you can run and be unattended and go do something else while they run, and they're going to be fine until you check on them later. Now, an unburdened task isn't one that runs and then that pop-up comes up in the middle of it. Yeah, you have to watch for that. So let's look at how we evaluate our automation processes. If you walk out into the vendor gallery outside, you're going to see a whole bunch of booths that are about automating your fleet. I'm talking about configuration management, LandRev, Puppet, Chef, Apple Profile Manager. They're all tools that, based on policies and procedures, they can apply predefined changes and settings to systems en masse. And even better, they can detect when a change has been made and remediate that change. I do it on the cheap a little bit at my school. I use nested manifests in Monkey, and I use profiles because I don't have the budget to buy some of those really cool tools, but I think we're going to be moving in that direction. It's just a matter of not if, but when. And if my management is watching this video,
Thank you. Yeah.
yes.
So we set up automated procedures that run at periodic times and predetermined times. For example, you might have a script that validates a database, make sure that it's just as reliable and that all the data is exactly formatted the way it needs to be. In some sites, those scripts might run under the credentials of an actual user. So it might be your guy from 2 desks over who set up a script, and it still happens to run as him. And that's great until he leaves the company, if he gets hit by the lottery bus, we like to say. So those automated processes die. So good sites run those scripts under a role account instead. Here's an example. The FileMaker server app runs under a username called FM server. And it does that so that no matter what other users are on the machine or happen to be logged in, they won't affect that particular process. So using role accounts can be really helpful. And that's an account that exists even if the department changes staff. This is a place where you can watch for sysadmins who are kind of slipping into a lazy practice, which happens from time to time. But you do need to document what those role accounts are, put those in your ops doc. That's a great place for those to live.
And that can be a good reminder when you're filling out that ops doc. Oh, right. Can't be running as user Brian. It has to be running as user this process.
Right. It's also great for troubleshooting when you can't understand what's happening. At least you can know what user things are running under. So this is the part where Future Dentist comes back and talks about notifications. If you've got automated process, you want to watch out for a situation where they're sending you email all the time, because what you end up with is a noisy monitor, and that's going to lead to something called threat fatigue. When somebody says, hey, 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 after a while you stop listening.
It's like my kids. Dad, 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 dad. Look at my hand,
So-
look at my hand.
Right. So the rules for this are fairly simple. If it needs human action now, whatever it happens to be, send a text message to whatever the on-call phone is. If it needs action in 24 hours, have it automatically create a ticket in your support system. If it's just an informational message, something completed, or something is some particular process finished copying what it was supposed to do, log that to a file. It's something that you can go check on later. It doesn't need to send you a text message. It doesn't need to spawn a ticket in your support system. And if there's no information, don't log anything. It sounds obvious, but
And this is that
Here we
worlds
are.
collide thing, where your SLAs, those service level agreements that you've committed to, match the importance of how quickly you're being notified. If you have an SLA that says, this system will be up within every 15 minutes, you better get a phone call.
right, so that you can meet it.
Yeah. Fleet management, we were talking about this as we were working on the presentation. We were curious which users at Mac admins are singularly responsible for the largest fleet of systems. So we got anybody out here that is managing 10,000 systems or more? All right, okay, we have a single hand. That was a real
right.
quick poll.
Moving on.
What are you using for fleet management? Casper?
Okay, very
Okay.
common.
And is that spread out across multiple geographic locations? Okay.
Okay.
How many sysadmins do you have managing a fleet of that size? 1.5. Wow.
Wow.
All right, that gets a round of applause there. So that was 1.5 sysadmins for a fleet of 10,000 through Casper. So either Casper's doing a really awesome job, or you've got some fantastic automation. So either way, that is awesome.
That's right.
So talk to him about the tools that he's using.
Right. He's got it figured out.
Think about that when you're talking about how you're managing the fleet, all the systems you manage, and that's not just workstations or iOS devices. That's printers and key network pieces of equipment like routers and switches and access points,
Security cameras.
and all the things that plug into the walls, your phone systems.
Right.
If it has ones and zeros flowing through it, it ends up falling under our purview.
That's right. So in that sense, you do want to be able to keep track of all these things. You should know which machines you have, ideally where they are, who they're assigned to. Knowing what OS is on them is helpful, and there are lots of tools that will query your machines for you and tell you that. Knowing what the disk size is, ideally knowing how much free space there might be and getting alerts on that can be helpful. Knowing what the maintenance is for those machines or who to make contact with. For instance, if you've got equipment that can only be serviced by a vendor, or if you've got a specific contract, knowing who to make contact with when weird things happen is important.
Your management probably expects you to be able to know all these things off the top of your head. We don't, because we realize that's something we can look up.
Right.
But having this information available to you is key.
Okay. Automated OS
I
installation.
wonder where we could go to learn about that.
So if you've been here this week, you've probably heard all about this from all sorts of different players. There are lots of different products that can help you put an OS on a machine in an automated way. And you want to do that because it creates a uniform, consistent installation. It removes any inconsistencies between loads when different people are doing them, or between other events as well. And also, we recommend that you wipe the machine before it gets cascaded to a new user. That way you make sure to get the hardware in a known good and supportable state. You know exactly what it is before it goes to that new person on their first day, according to your...
That's right.
Yes, that's right. Okay.
Did you turn off Find My iPhone?
Right.
Patching across your fleet, if you've been to any of the security sessions here, is critical. Because if you haven't seen how quickly a set of systems can be compromised, either vertically or laterally, it's dizzying. The last session I just went to, I was terrified. You don't have the time to visit machines one at a time, so you need a system that is capable of delivering and reporting back that it was successfully delivered. It's a poor use of your time to go and touch every machine. Thank you, SIP and NetBoot. Many times I automate things not because it will save time. In fact, there's a few occasions where automating things and the time it took me to write the script didn't save time. I probably could have just gone out to the lab and touched all the machines. But I do it to ensure consistency because I want to make sure I do it exactly the right way every time. That being said, your updates should happen frequently, and if at all possibility, silently. Users will do anything to get in the way of preventing those because they want to go and see the ClickUp kittens.
Right. Okay, a refresh policy. This means how often do people get new machines?
Sysadmins, every single year, right?
No. How many people know what their refresh policy is at their organization?
Oh, good. That's excellent.
A lot more than I was expecting. That's fantastic. Okay, then we won't have to spend a lot of time on this because you have one, so clearly you know why it's important. If you don't have one of these, what's going to happen is the machine's not going to get replaced until something bad happens. And we try to prevent bad things from happening. It's just part of what we do as a professional. So if you don't have one, you might consider putting them on a 3-year cycle. So that means you're going to budget to replace 1/3 of the machines in your fleet annually, which means every quarter you should be replacing about 9%. So plan for that. CFOs love when you plan for this because then they can determine when in the quarter that purchase actually happens. They can schedule that to happen on a month where the funds are definitely going to be available. If that's a little too often, 3 years, you could do it in a 4-year cycle. Again, that means you're replacing a quarter of your machines annually, and that means you're replacing 6%, only 6 machines per quarter? No, 6% every quarter. So we're going to move on to our Q&A roundup. We've got a few more questions. Okay. Bring those up.
So there's a user here. This is they have a homebrewed call rotation system, and it's pretty basic. They're looking at PagerDuty. Are there any other hotline on-call systems that we should look at as we consider what we might move to? I'm going to go ahead and open that to the floor. Is anybody using a call rotation software that they like that works out really well?
Okay.
We're going to grab the catch box and bring it over
Watch
here.
your laptops, watch your drinks.
Okay, coming at you.
We just barely started using OpsGenie
Okay.
Opsgenie.
at our shop, which is very similar to PagerDuty, but they're cheaper.
What do you like about it? Cheaper?
Yeah, that was pretty much the reason we chose them. They're newer than PagerDuty and trying to get more of the market, I think, but the level of features that they offer is almost identical.
Okay, cool.
Interesting.
Great.
Okay.
I got another.
There was
user in the
another
back.
hand.
Coming at you. I just like
So
throwing it.
Yeah, same answer as those two names he mentioned, we've also used. And to expand on that a little bit, if it's not something you're using in your organization, it's great because it's going to notify certain people based on time of day and who's on call and do auto escalation if a person doesn't answer their phone. I would definitely use a service that's not in your infrastructure because the system has to tell you when your infrastructure is down. So if all your ISPs go out, there's no way to tell you because if it runs in-house.
Okay, cool. I had played around with, wow, 2 microphones.
Don't do that.
Booming voice.
No.
I had played around with a package called Manage Engine, and that had a pager rotation system in it, but I'm a department of 1, and it didn't seem to support that pager rotation.
Not a lot of rotation. All right, moving on to our next one.
About using the canary process.
Oh,
Test
yeah.
groups must contain users and communities beyond what you and yourself and your IT team got to have real world use. Yeah, that's
Absolutely.
That's critical. I do not for a moment pretend that I know all the things that my users do because they represent what I refer to as diapers to diplomas. We have a nursery through 12. So they do all kinds of things.
Things you would never predict. And that's good. You're essentially crowdsourcing people attempting to use machines and figuring out where the weak points are. And that's very important. All right, one thing next.
If your reporting tools don't notify you that they ran and don't log anything if nothing happened, how can you be sure they're running at all? Who watches the watchman? We've got a bunch of foxes that take care of the hen house. What are you talking about?
They work cheap.
So you can look in your logs and you can see that your reporting processes have run. Now, that's not to say that they didn't run incorrectly, that they ran and, yep, everything over there is running just fine.
Right.
You need to test your scripts. You need to insert, if you go back in time and watch our presentation from yesterday, you need to insert known data into your system to test those cases. So make it fail to make sure that your scripts work. And then once you're reasonably comfortable with them, you can ensure that, okay, this process last ran at 7:53 on Tuesday. It didn't report anything, so I can be reasonably confident that it is successful.
Things like Casper or things like Meraki Systems Manager, they will let you know if a machine isn't checking in or if certain processes that are intended to happen aren't. So I think that you can get dates of last run on those for the most part.
This was cool. I like this question here. Did anybody upvote it? Good, they did. A comment. A subset of these questions would be good to use during your job searches to assess the state of a potential employer's operation.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I read this actually backwards, that these are really good interview questions to ask a potential candidate. How would you? So both sides of that coin.
It works both ways. When you're going in for an interview, you're trying to figure out what am I going to walk into on my first day, and pick half a dozen of these. And when you come back for your second interview, pick another different half dozen. So make sure that you really know what's going on. I think this list is really great. I found it 6 months ago, and I said to Brian, you know, this is the kind of thing that they really don't talk about at Mac Admins, and I think it would make a fantastic presentation. All right, any others?
So Rusty was looking for a quick show of hands. 3 years versus 4 years.
All right, how many have a refresh policy that's 3 years between refreshes? Okay,
Wow,
I'm
all
gonna say
the 3 years set on this
that's
side?
roughly half of you, ballpark.
How many 4 years?
Okay, that's the other half.
I work at a school. I have to beat up a 6th grader to get a new iPad, so.
They know why.
Consider extending your warranty, because the vendors I'm working with actually push me out to 5 years, so my parts pool gets okay. If you need to extend, budgets get tight.
So the comment was?
I'm going to repeat that for the folks listening at home with the home game. Vendors support 3 years, 4 years, and 5 years out. And sometimes when you purchase right at time of purchase, you can get a decent deal on going 5 years out. And if your user experience supports or your cascading schedule supports going out to 5 years, you buy that high-end system for the art department, and then accounting can handle that when it comes down into the 4 and 5 year mark. That's a good use of your dollars. And having those systems under warranty the whole time if that works within your organization, is also a good use of manpower. Like say, there's problems you can throw people at and problems you can throw money at. That is a problem you can throw money at.
That's right. All right, I think we have one last one.
One last question. Chris asks, I have a 24-hour help desk staff. Would a call rotation system be beneficial for my organization?
Do all of them work all 24 hours at a time? If not, if any of them are going to go home and sleep, or if any of them are going to take time off, or if any of them are going to schedule dentist appointments or what have you, you need to get a point where somebody's always available, but it doesn't need to be the same people all the time.
So I can see where it would be beneficial for your organization. Where's Chris? I can see where it would be beneficial because the person who's working that shift, maybe you have 3 people that work 8-hour shifts, and they all work 7 days a week. Maybe they don't have the answer to whatever question, and they have to escalate it. And so if you have to escalate it, that's where your pager rotation comes in. There's always somebody available to answer the question that you can't answer.
Right.
So there's got to be, the buck stops here with somebody. And maybe there isn't. Maybe your organization just isn't set up that way.
Okay.
So that is it. We're going to move on to our third half of the show. Bad stuff happens to good people, and it's all about how you handle it. So let's talk about that.
So you have to determine if your servers can keep operating even if a disk dies,
Right.
or multiple disks. And RAID is a good way to handle that, making sure that the information you care about is spread across multiple, I used to say multiple spindles, multiple platters, but
Multiple chips?
chips, yeah.
Is there still a fire in my office?
You also need a server that has multiple network interface cards so that you can have some type of failover or load balancing between those. Multiple power supplies are always great. Apple, are you listening? And maybe even redundant electrical circuits that supply your server room. So let's say you can't afford those things. If you can't afford those best practices, you maybe can afford the better than yesterday practices, as Alistair taught us to say.
Break out the duct tape.
That's right. So if your budget doesn't support that, you might try virtualizing, taking your servers and turning them into a VM, determining if there's a place in your environment where you can host those, either inside your own walls, or if you're allowed to, host them at some other provider. That might make sense. If you can't afford that, if you have the lowest budget, get in a external drive and schedule a carbon copy clone for as often as you can stand. And that way, if something happens to the internal drive on your server, you can at least boot from that and keep things running. There's also an approach that I've read about, but I've never seen implemented, called redundant array of independent servers, where people will hook up 2 different machines via the Thunderbolt cable and have one fail over to the other if something weird happens. I haven't seen that, but I find it kind of interesting. I don't know if I would use that, but it's worth investigating.
It sounds like a hackathon project. Mac Mini server, are you looking? Are you listening? Any network admins in here?
Okay.
Hi, yay.
Hey, Adam.
All right. So all of our systems depend on being connected to each other. And so your access points are connected to switches. Switches are connected to routers. Routers are connected to your core, and that connects you to the outside world. If there isn't redundant paths along that, then you have single points of failure all over your network. Depending on your cost and benefit, and this is something that, again, your C-level management needs to commit to. They said, yes, we agree, we understand that this is an exposure for us. Do your best to make your core redundant, because it's where everything comes into. And if that part is not redundant, then when that fails, you've lost everything that feeds into that.
And that's okay as long as they agree to it.
So make sure that there are multiple paths on your network. This can be expensive, but downtime is also expensive too. And it's just a matter of negotiating that.
Okay. Disaster prep number 3, are your backups automated? You're going to end up needing backups for about 4 different reasons. There's the oops, I deleted a file reason. There's the oops, the hardware died reason. We've got to bring something back. There's the oops, the building burned down reason, which is why you have off-site backups.
Burned down, fell over, and into a swamp.
And then there's also archiving. That's the sometimes why of backups. Archiving technically isn't a backup. It's a single copy elsewhere. but you'll want to keep those in various places. But the thing about backups is you want to have them in an automated fashion happening and reporting back to you that they completed successfully, which machines have checked in and been backed up, and which machines haven't, which machines are several days out. Tools like CrashPlan can give you lots and lots of reporting about those kinds of things. Okay, disaster prep. Are you testing it? Because the thing about backups is nobody really cares about backups. They only care about getting their data back. They really care about restores. They don't really care about backups. So on a regular basis, you should be restoring files from a backup. You should be standing up a server from a snapshot, making sure it can do all the things it's supposed to do.
Stand up multiple servers in a VM, in an isolated VM environment, and make sure they still do the things that your production servers do. And that's a great way to build a QA environment, is to restore your backups. So look, 2 birds with 1 stone. Some of you may have a remote data center. For me, that loud deafening noise in the corner of my office is my server stack. But if you are relying on remote systems, then you should also have the ability to have remote power and remote console access to those. They make really cool KVMs that are network addressable, so that you can access that keyboard, that mouse, and even the power switch all remotely. There are servers that have that built in. As much as I love Apple hardware, my heart goes out to ILO on HP. They make some really cool lights out stuff. So I can actually build from a bare bones, as long as that power got pushed on for the very first time and connected to power, I can build a complete VMware server and then start building the stack on top of that completely remotely, totally lights out. I can reboot the system. I can check the status indicators of every LED in and outside of the case. If you don't have access to that, you're missing out. Also, do you have a video feed of your data center? I know that's kind of critical for security access to a data center, but it's also kind of useful for troubleshooting. I have, on more than one occasion, used the video feed from our data center to be able to say, oh, look, those light indicators are out. Or the CD-ROM drive was ejected. That was on one of them on the night my daughter was born, and I had to stop at the data center on the way to the hospital.
So our last section is an audit of your security practices. And this is by no means an exhaustive security audit. It's meant for you to just evaluate the culture of security that may exist in your organization.
Don't worry, we weren't late. We made it to the hospital in time.
Good. In a pinch, I suppose everyone here could count Gatekeeper as a self-updating, silent anti-malware software.
Wah, wah.
I guess. But you have to think about other endpoint solutions. Do you have something that updates itself? If it does, how often is it running? Is there a dashboard that you can use that will let you know what is installed and when it's running?
And these days, more than once per day is the right answer to that.
Right, for both of those. Yeah. There are lots of cross-platform solutions for this now. Investigate those if you're not already doing it.
I'm a pretty big fan of Avast right now. It's what I've been using at the school, and it gives me fantastic monitoring that I can pull up from anywhere. It's cloud-based, and see all my endpoints, when their last time they were refreshed, and it can quarantine them if they haven't had a refresh of policy within a certain amount of time. And they have a fantastic offering for education. Security practice number 2, we are moving through this and at a good time, good pace. Written security policy is fundamental. In fact, there should probably be several of them because different things apply to different people. At the very least, you'd have several different parts. Consider user data. Those are all the documents and spreadsheets and pictures of your dog that are on the servers, but also sensitive environments like business and finance, protected healthcare information. If you're in education, fundraising and donor management. Those are all really important things that have different security implications around them, either through regulation or through common sense practices. If you handle any transactional data, like credit cards, then you've got to have policies in place for that by regulatory standards, PCI DSS compliance. These policies should be reviewed at least annually by any parties directly involved with them. So if you're working with fundraiser and donor management, then your director of advancement should probably be involved in the discussion of those policies and the annual review to make sure that your actions and procedures are in line with what they expect and need out of you. Even if you're not required to do so by regulations, you should still consider including relevant security policies to your employee handbook and make them available internally for quick review. That way, when you run up against that social media policy, you can say, well, if you look at section 15 in the employee handbook, this is where we're referring to, so please don't do that again. We have ours on our payroll provider's internal portal. So when people go and log in to see their paycheck, there's a big shiny link right next to them that can show them the employee handbook. And in there is our security policy. And it is required for them to review once a year. And they check the box, and we can see who has reviewed it and who has not. If you don't have security, Paylocity is who we use that through if anybody's interested. If you don't have security policies in place, and you need some good templates, sans.org has some really nice templates that you can use to build your own. Clover Security has another specifically towards finance and PCI compliance. There's some good ones there. So start with those, and then have discussions with those key players in your environment to make sure that you are protecting what they expect to be protected. And this one goes right along with the annual review of policies. Submitting to periodic audits. Knowing what you know and knowing what you don't know is important. It's a good idea to bang on the doors and make sure the hinges are still attached. Even if this means using a predefined process that you've already agreed on internally and saying, okay, we're going to go check this. Yep, that door's locked. Yep, that door's locked. That's still better than not doing anything at all. But there's nothing that says you can't do this yourself, unless, of course, there's a regulation that says you can't do it yourself. But if that's the case, establish a close relationship with a trusted vendor, trusted external vendor, and in our case, the payment processor that we use, they offer a subscription service that will go and test our external boundaries on a quarterly basis, and they email me a very nice report. It's very readable. They explain each CVE that they're testing, and if there's something that doesn't pass, exactly what I need to do to mitigate that. It was really easy. The last one I went through, I said, oh, here we go, change that policy, done. And I could say, test again, and the next day I get a new report, you have passed. In the event that a user leaves your organization, can you remove their access quickly? More importantly, can you do that for a sysadmin? And I realize that it's kind of uncomfortable to talk about at a conference for sysadmins, to think about leaving for having to account for a privileged user's exit, but prudent security practices are there for a reason, to protect everybody involved. It's a reality that we all understood when we entered this field, that we hold the keys and a significant amount of power within our organization, and it should be expected that the door closes tightly behind us. It protects the company and it protects you. How does it protect you? In the event that something happens after you leave the organization, you didn't have access. So they can't.
You have plausible deniability.
You have plausible deniability.
That's right.
And it's not uncommon for things to go south after you leave an organization. Maybe they didn't staff appropriately after you left and servers went down because they weren't being monitored anymore. That's not your fault. And by not having access to that, you're not immediately looked at as a potential suspect. More sensitive than that, can you change those root passwords within an hour? If something's really been compromised, can you get in there and change anything that's critical? If you can't, have a checklist that's ready, that ops document that says, okay, we've got a problem, we need to go ahead and update this. Do we have a checklist that says every place that this needs to be changed? Change the passwords globally by following that list and adding to it as you realize, oh, we forgot the switch that's down in athletics. Okay, we need to update that in our document. For obscure systems that require a complicated procedure, document that exact command with all the hashes and slashes and regular expressions that need to go into that.
But no quotes.
No quotes, yeah, watch out for quotes. But document that exact process to change the password. If you have the ability, document how to activate this process. You know, who pulls the lever on the wall and breaks the glass in the event of an emergency. And list all the exceptions that are still required to be done manually. And of course, automate whatever you can. And
Okay.
now our final QA roundup.
Just a few.
There are 3 in the hopper here. How are you guys so awesome? No, sorry. How many of you guys do 2-year replacements?
Replacing machines every other year, every 24 months.
Really? 2-year replacements? Good for you, Adam.
Another one over here.
2-year replacements. Wow.
Do you work for yourself, Adam? No? He says that they lease. Okay.
Okay, custom Apple Care for 2 years.
Wow. That's a great way to always be on recent equipment.
Our one-to-one program, we roll in through a lease. So next year when we have to provide systems for the first time for our seniors, they're going to need a 1-year lease so that class is taken care of when everybody else moves up one spot. So we'll have a 1-year lease and a 2-year lease for the seniors and the juniors next year. Everybody else will be able to handle a 4-year lease properly.
Okay, jump to the next one. Somebody asks, how hot in Fahrenheit can my server room get before I have to get out of bed at 3 a.m.? Yes. Ask your vendor.
Thresholds.
Yes, and be monitoring for environmental conditions of temperature, humidity. Like maybe there was a fire and the temperature went up, and then suddenly the humidity went up. When the
700 degrees in there. Come on.
Yes, you want to put that in your op stock of what are the thresholds that you need to be keeping track of. All right.
Always DNS is
Pam
always helpful.
asks, redundant array of independent servers. Here's where you can learn more about that.
I'll leave that up there for a moment.
Yep, and I'll read the last one.
If you were my class of 7th graders, you'd all have your iPads out going, and then you'd never look at it. I don't know why I can't back up my iPad. It says I'm out of space.
Everybody good? Seeing some nodding? Okay. Move on to the last one for today. What was the name of the monitoring/endpoint cloud-based tool? There's one called Meraki Systems Manager. It's Meraki.
Go see Karen out in the lobby.
They're a vendor here today.
Also, I can show you. I manage 7 organizations through Meraki, so happy to show you how that works.
Right. There's also another one called Casper. It's by a company named Jamf, and they are also a vendor out in the hallway. You can make sure to check them out.
LandRev. I don't know if LandRev is cloud-based though. But
You might want to ask them. Look, just find the people with the yellow lanyards. They're good people to talk to.
And the endpoint solution that I used for just anti-malware was Avast. Yar.
Okay, so that was the Q&A roundup.
Is there anybody else I can throw this lime green box at?
Any other Q&A?
Lovely.
Okay. If not, I've been Dennis Wurster, and this is Brian.